Fear, it's about as primal as it gets, right? But for most of human history, the biggest fear wasn't what was lurking in the dark. It was what was looking down from the heavens. So today, we're going to trace the wild evolution of that very specific fear, how it went from divine judgment all the way to a modern clinical diagnosis. Let's get into it. And really, this whole thing kicks off with a question that, honestly, people have been struggling with forever. Where's that line? The line between a healthy reverence, a deep respect for a higher power or a moral code, and when it tips over into something obsessive, something unhealthy. So to really get to the root of this, we've got to go way, way back. We're talking one of the cradles of civilization, ancient Mesopotamia. Because it turns out their whole relationship with the divine, well, it was basically built on a foundation of pure anxiety. And, when you look at it, it's not hard to see why they were so anxious. Their pantheon of gods was just massive. We're talking over 2,000 different deities. Can you even imagine trying to keep all of them happy? The pressure would have been absolutely unreal. Yeah, and this quote really just nails it. The basic idea was that the gods weren't just powerful, they were super critical, and boy, were they quick to punish you if you messed up. There wasn't this idea of a big reward in the afterlife. Being good was just about, well, cooperating, keeping the world spinning and trying your best to stay on their good side. And look, this wasn't some high-level philosophy discussion. This stuff shaped everything in their daily lives. From using superstition and fortune-telling to try and keep evil away, to performing endless rituals just to try and appease these gods. For the average person, life was just filled with this constant background hum of dread. Okay, but things start to change. As religious ideas evolved, so did the way people thought about fear itself. Christian theology, especially, started to dig into this really important question. Wait a minute, is all fear created equal, or are there actually different types of fear? And they came up with this really critical distinction. On one side, you've got what they called servile fear. The easiest way to think about it is like a slave fearing their master. It's all about avoiding punishment, right? It's based on torment. But then on the other side, there's filial fear. This is more like the respect a child has for a loving parent. It's not about being afraid of getting hurt. It's about awe and reverence and just not wanting to let them down. Now, I know what you might be thinking. There's that super famous line from the Bible, right? Perfect love casteth out fear. So, does that mean if you truly love God, you're not supposed to fear him at all? Well, like with most things, it's a little more complicated than that. So here's the key. It all comes down to the original Greek. The word they use for torment there is kolossus, and that word doesn't just mean any old fear. It specifically means punishment. So the verse isn't saying love gets rid of all fear. It's saying it gets rid of that servile fear, the fear of being punished. But that other kind, that awe, that reverence, that filial fear, oh yeah, that's supposed to stick around. And this quote just brings it all home perfectly. The idea is you need both. Fear, that sense of awe, stops love from becoming kind of shallow or disrespectful. But love is what keeps that awe from spiraling into just blind terror. It's all about finding that perfect, delicate balance. But what happens when that balance gets completely destroyed? What happens when someone's total devotion to a moral code gets betrayed, and all that reverence just sours and turns into something really destructive? Well, the ancient Greeks, they had a word for that, lysa. And we're not just talking about being angry here. This is a complete and total loss of control. It's a frenzied madness, a state that could literally transform a person from gentle and kind to utterly savage in the blink of an eye. Just listen to this description taken from the story of Heracles. We're talking eyes rolled and bulged, froth on his chin, a maniacal laugh. This isn't some quiet, internal turmoil. This is a violent, explosive, external breakdown. It's a total shattering of the self. And you can kind of see echoes of it today, right? And stories about righteous fury that just boils over when people feel like their core values have been trampled on. The Greeks had this fascinating way of thinking about it, using the metaphor of the tragic dog. This is a person who is all in on society's values, justice, honor, you name it. But then, the very society they serve betrays them. They become a victim of the system, and that betrayal is what drives them mad. They're the complete opposite of the philosophical dog, who takes one look at those societal rules and consciously says, Nah, I'm out. Okay, so up to this point, we've basically been talking about fear as an external thing. It's coming from punishing gods or it's coming from a broken society. But now, the story takes a huge turn inward. What happens when the thing you're terrified of isn't out there at all, but it's actually inside your own mind? And this is where we meet the modern diagnosis, scrupulosity. Today, we understand this as a form of obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, but it's a very specific kind. The obsessions, the compulsions, they're all laser focused on moral or religious issues. The fear that you've sinned, that you're a bad person, it just becomes absolutely all consuming. What's so fascinating is seeing how this one internal disorder shows up differently across various faiths. For a Christian, it might be the obsessive thought that just thinking a sin is as bad as actually doing it. For someone in the Jewish or Muslim faith, it might look like compulsive rituals around washing or prayer. The root anxiety is the same, but the way it comes out is shaped by their beliefs. And this timeline here really shows what a long and winding road it's been to get to where we are today. For centuries, people saw this as a purely spiritual issue. They called it religious scruples. It wasn't until 1691 that it was first even talked about as a disorder, religious melancholy. And it took until the 20th century for the conversation to really move from the priest's office to the doctor's office, which eventually led to it being recognized as a form of OCD. And that right there, that is the fundamental shift we've been tracing this whole time. The source of the fear literally moved. It's no longer about an external punishing God in the heavens. Now it's a battle against an internal, looping, anxious thought inside your own brain. The battlefield has shifted from the temple to the self. So, that brings us full circle, back to a question. We've seen this concept journey from divine judgment all the way to a clinical diagnosis. So the question for the future is, as we get better and better at understanding our own minds, how is that going to change our relationship with these ancient ideas of guilt, morality, and even the divine itself? It's a pretty big thought to leave you with.